In the latest drop of court filings, this is from the Idaho Statesman, Brian Koberger's criminal case, the prosecution hinted that it might call members of the 30-year-old's family to testify at his upcoming trial. Latah County Senior Deputy Prosecutor Ashley Jennings asked in the Friday following, which was published on the court's website Monday, that if any members of Koberger's family are listed as witnesses for the prosecution, that they be excluded from the courtroom until they testify. The prosecution has until April 21st to file its witness list. Koberger, as we know, is charged with the first-degree murder of 4 University of Idaho students after prosecutors allege he stabbed the students to death in November 13th, 2022. The victims were Madison Mogen, Kaylee Gonsalves, Zana Knodel, and Ethan Chapin. And as we know, Koberger was a graduate student studying criminal justice and criminology at Washington State University in Pullman, Washington. That's another thing, is like when you're trying to diminish someone on one hand, the part of them that is obviously above average is that he's a PhD student. Yes, he has all of these afflictions. How is he capable of doing such high-level academic work with all of these potential mental disorders, physical disorders? How is that possible, Mike?
Yeah, Bill, it's the moment you bring up something like a diminished capacity defense, elements of it, he has spatial orientation issues, coordination issues, OCD, ADHD, all these things that, many people may have to deal with these sort of things. And he has to deal with these sort of things, perhaps. However, the moment you bring that up, the prosecution, as a defense attorney, then the prosecution is going to rebut all of the assertions that he's incapable by saying, okay, you say, assuming for argument's sake, assuming arguendo that you do have these issues, you have your own car, you drove across country, you get up and down stairs pretty well to get to your apartment in Washington and to your classes. You're able to juggle classes. You're able to walk around a classroom, right, and talk without looking at your feet. You can do all of these things that normal people do. And if you are afflicted with this, it means you've overcome it. And so therefore, it's really not much of a handicap, is it, to you? So it's always, you want to bring that up, but you always have to remember, as an attorney, the moment you bring something up, there's an advantage to you. However, that you are always susceptible to a counterattack by the opposing party. And in this case, the more he brings up that he's incapable, physically a 30-year-old man, incapable of doing these sorts of things, the prosecution is going to be able to rebut that.
Yeah, there's you open up a Pandora's box of possibilities, both for the prosecution and the defense may not like the box that they opened, I want to remind everyone that back in, I believe it was 2023, Brian Koberger's sister feared that her brother was involved in the stabbings of 4 University of Idaho students before police swooped on their parents' home and arrested him for murder, according to a bombshell report. Sources told NBC's Dateline that one of the accused killer's older siblings grew increasingly suspicious of her brother and his behavior when the family gathered to spend the holidays together. Her suspicions were so great that at one point, several family members searched Mr. Koberger's white Hyundai Elantra for possible evidence of the crime. Madison Mogen, Kaylee Gonsalves, Zana Knodel, and Ethan Chapin were found brutally stabbed to death in an off-campus home in Moscow, Idaho, that the 3 women shared with 2 other roommates on November 13th. For more than 6 weeks, no suspects were publicly identified and leads appeared to have gone cold. And we know what happened after that. But my point mentioning this, and this is from a newspaper called The Independent, if Koberger's sister spoke to these journalists, don't you think that law enforcement scooped her up and took a formal interview from her? And perhaps another family member? So that would have been memorialized. Her testimony would be memorialized on a complaint follow-up by a detective. And now she can't deny what she said because she was interviewed and she said that on this date. So she can't recant what she said, Mike.
Yeah, it's difficult because if say she actually did speak to a reporter and the reporter got it down accurately and published it. And the police found out, and the police said, oh, we better interview her. And the police go to her and ask, did you say these things? Did you actually think your brother was guilty or is capable of killing 4 people in such a brutal fashion? If she denied it, well, then the police are going to look at the reporter, question him, and subpoena his notes. And if his notes say that, this is what she said to me, then they're going to know that she's lying in denying it. And then they're going to interview her, do a real formal interview, and go over everything with her. And so therefore it raises a specter that if the defense wants to call her to the witness stand and say, Brian's always had a terrible time with walking or something, and he's incapable of this, the prosecution is going to say, but isn't it true that you told a reporter that you thought your brother did it? Or if the prosecution calls the witness, the sister, to say, hey, you even yourself said that Koberger did this, and she might say yes. That's one of the things, as you just mentioned, Pandora's box. The moment the defense or the prosecution opens up a box, you're always susceptible to, all kinds of things popping out that you didn't want to be made issues of in a case. But you're right. It presents a real issue. That report presents a real issue for the defense, way much more, of course, than the prosecution. But it creates a problem for the defense, because if she actually admits those sorts of statements, you don't want her on the stand at that point. Maybe they'll perhaps limit their questioning of Koberger's family to maybe his mother and father.
Possibly. This is from CBS this morning.
Case. Brian Koberger is all set to go on trial in just a few months for the stabbing deaths of 4 University of Idaho students in 2022. The court documents reveal that prosecutors may call on his family to testify against him, which means they could be barred from attending the trial. Jonathan Bigliotti explains.
As the families of Kaylee Gonzalez, Madison Mojen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin prepare for the trial of the man accused of killing them, Brian Koberger wants his family members in court too. But in a new court filing, prosecutors say they may need to testify, and if they do, they can't attend the trial, adding the defendant has a constitutional and statutory right to a public trial, but that does not extend to defendants choosing whom sits in the courtroom. Koberger's father was seen with him on a cross-country drive just 1 month after the murders, while a manhunt was ongoing.
At this point, it's not certain that the state will call any of the family members, including Koberger's father. What's certain is that the state wants to preserve its opportunity to do so.
CBS News legal analyst Jessica Levinson.
The state wants to make sure that people give testimony just based on their own observations, on what they saw and heard, not what they see and hear in a courtroom because they want to help one side or hurt another.
For months, as prosecutors have been building their case, the defense has been firing back to try to suppress pieces of evidence, including surveillance footage of a driver circling the student's home multiple times just before police say the murders happened. The judge has entered not guilty pleas on Koberger's behalf, and prosecutors are expected to finalize the witness list next month before the trial set for this summer. For CBS Mornings, I'm Jonathan Vigliotti.
So, there you have it. Will they be calling members of his family? I would think that I would want to cross-examine his father, who drove cross-country with him. How much do you think his father knows about this, Mike? Do you think he's totally oblivious to his son's guilt and or innocence? Or do you think he just wants no part of this as far as testifying?
Yeah, Bill, if I'm a dad like that, I don't want any part of testifying. I do want to be there, perhaps, to support my son, because he is my son after all, and you're supposed to take care of your family. But the problem is that opens up Pandora's box. If he can make it out there and he says he wants to be in court, the prosecutor is going to say, look, all witnesses on my list, I have 25 witnesses, 30 witnesses, 10 witnesses, whatever it is. Here's my witness list. They have to be in isolation. They can't be listening to what's going on in court, because if they testify later on in the trial, they're going to have heard all kinds of testimony from all kinds of people, both prosecution and defense, and it could color their testimony, their candor, their truthfulness. So you want all witnesses to be, secluded. So, it's a really difficult thing for the family. If the prosecution at the end of right before the trial begins, if both Ann Taylor and Bill Thompson agree that they're not going to call the Koberger family at all, either one of them makes it, if they do that ahead of time, pre-trial, then the Kobergers can attend the trial and sit wherever they can sit. But that always brings up another thing. What do you do about the security in the courtroom at that point? But if you're the dad, this puts you in a really tough position because you want to support your son, but you don't want to become a target for the prosecution or the defense to try to pick you apart.
Absolutely. Pauline Buckles, Brian did take that 6-hour detour on that cross-country drive that was odd, and his father said as much. Pauline, I remember that too. Yeah. And it seemed like they took the drive to avoid perhaps maybe an area that would have more state police on it. But it turned out they wind up getting pulled over twice anyway. In fact, that thumbnail that I made for this episode, this is from the state police camera when Brian Koberger was pulled over. And that's him and his father. And they were explaining where they were coming from. And I think that the state trooper was a little bit dumbfounded in the way that, well, why did you take the route you took? It doesn't make any sense that, you drove this many miles and the route you took makes no sense. So Pauline, you're 100% correct. You can see it a little better now. I always point out in this picture, if you look at Brian Koberger's right hand, and look at above the wrist, there appears to be a long scar there, which would be indicative of perhaps cutting himself during these, if he in fact is the stabber of these 4 students. And I've pointed that out numerous times. And that would be one of the things, of course, that the prosecution would check to see if he sought medical help or went to an emergency room or a doctor